then you can very well see a set of circumstances in which he might jump before he's pushed. But right now, I think he's determined to plough on. Stephen Flynn, the Westminster leader of the SNP, was out this morning saying that Humza would come out fighting. So we'll see what he's got to say in Dundee. I've heard a whisper that he may well be ditching some Green policies already. We might get that in the announcement. If that were to be the case, then he can kiss goodbye to any lingering hope that he had that the Greens might not vote against him next week.
Now, we're kicking off today with the big political news of the week. Humza Yousaf, his career seems to be on the line. And here to give us their verdict on all of this is Kevin Schofield from the Huffington Post and John Boothman from The Times. Yousaf seems to be on the rocks. You're both Scottish. Yesterday was the maddest day in Scottish politics possibly ever. What started as Yousaf trying to get ahead of the game by ending the Butte House agreement with the Greens has resulted in him facing a vote of no confidence. Well, here's Green Party co-governor Patrick Harvey speaking yesterday.
The First Minister is going to have to explain his decision, but this is his decision to end a cooperation agreement that until days ago he was giving his full backing to. He'll be shoring up support from his Conservative wing and ditching the progressive policy platform he was elected on, which he continued to endorse just days ago. And we now expect to see a raft of progressive policies watered down, delayed or ditched altogether.
John Boothman, what went wrong for Humza Yousaf?
Look, yesterday, you're right. It was. I mean, there's been some pretty mad days in Scottish politics, but that was one of the madder ones. It's almost like none of this was gamed properly. He never thought about what was going to happen next. A very quick decision's been taken on some pretty flimsy grounds that it would be better for him to ditch this agreement. Look, I think his intentions were they're trying to bring the SNP back into the mainstream to try and lose some of what they would describe as extremist politics of the Greens and actually get them back on a different course. But it all started going wrong. I think they made the assumption that the Greens, despite the fact that they were really, really very angry, that he could win them back over. And the whole thing just seemed to go awry as the day went on. We got to the end of the day, some suggestions coming from various quarters that he was considering his own future. I've written down a list of adjectives from the past few hours, even this morning, about the decision he took that I've had from SNP figures, and they read flabbergasted, dumbfounded, incredulous, inexplicable, complete idiocy. And you don't really need to travel very far to get this. So they haven't thought through the consequences properly. He's put himself in a position where he's got now 2 votes of no confidence next Wednesday. He's dependent on, and I mean, who would ever have thought this? Alex Salmond, of all people, who's been at war with Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP now for the past few years. I mean, there's a meme going around on social media which is a big figure of Alex Salmond with Humza Yousaf in his pocket. So this is where we are. And, there's not that many people forecasting that the First Minister's got that much longer to go.
Kevin, the First Minister's had to cancel a speech he was going to give this morning. There are rumours that he may be speaking at an event. This was a pre-planned event to do with housing taking place in Dundee. If he does speak, we are going to be bringing that to you. But Kevin, do you think he might be done for by the end of today?
No, I mean, I'm making myself a hostage to fortune here. I think he'll probably see the day out. Whether he'll last the weekend, I guess, remains to be seen. I think there's an even chance maybe that he'll go before next Wednesday. These votes, as John was just saying there, if it's made clear to him that he's not going to win, or that basically he's run out of road, he's lost support of his own party, then you can very well see a set of circumstances in which he might jump before he's pushed. But right now, I think he's determined to plough on. Stephen Flynn, the Westminster leader of the SNP, was out this morning saying that Humza would come out fighting. So we'll see what he's got to say in Dundee. I've heard a whisper that he may well be ditching some Green policies already. We might get that in the announcement. If that were to be the case, then he can kiss goodbye to any lingering hope that he had that the Greens might not vote against him next week. So we'll just have to wait and see. But John's right. It is a hugely ironic situation now where he's relying on Ash Regan, who he said was no great loss when she defected from the SNP to Alaba last year, for his own political survival. He's just gamed this terribly, and it's all come crashing down around his ears.
And we're going to be joined later on in the show, in about 20 minutes or so, by Douglas Ross, of course, leader of the Scottish Conservatives. He put a motion of no confidence forward, John, against Humza Yousaf himself, the First Minister. Now, the the Scottish Labour are saying that they will come forward with a vote of no confidence for the entire government. What's the difference between the two?
I've just been talking to Labour's Deputy Leader, Jackie Bailey, and she says the reason they've done this is this just isn't about the incompetence of Humza Yousaf. This is about the whole lot of them. It's no use at the end of the day just getting rid of him when you're talking about a government that's incompetent, and that's why they've put that forward. Some people, have speculated that it might be easier. For example, should the Greens look at this, that it would be easier for them not to support a Tory motion and to support a Labour one. I'm not so sure about that, but I think that point is it's not just about Humza Yousaf, it's about a wider thing. It's worth saying at this point that this morning you've got Douglas Ross coming on, and this shows one of the reasons that I think the SNP have wanted this to happen. There was a by-election in a marginal constituency for a council seat this morning, and despite the fact across the UK, the rest of the UK, the Tories are doing really badly, the Tories saw an increase in their vote in Arbroath by 10%, and the SNP went back 7%. One of the big motivations for this change in getting rid of the Greens and the Butte House Agreement and some of those policies that Kevin was talking about is that SNP MPs are staring down the barrel of a gun about the future at Westminster.
Kevin, if it does go to a vote of no confidence in the government, which I believe needs 25 MSPs in order for it to even get debated, which means that Labour are going to have to get support from elsewhere. I think they're only down to 22. Does Humza Yousaf, does the Scottish Government have the numbers to hold on to power?
Well, I think this may be more difficult, I think, for Labour to get this one passed, because effectively it could well lead to a snap Scottish general election, and that is the last thing I think that a lot of the opposition parties might wish to see. So I think they might find it more difficult actually to vote with Labour on this one. It's a bit easier to get rid of Humza Yousaf rather than getting rid of the entire government and, as I say, triggering a snap election. So, but everything's up in the air right now. You can't rule anything out. As we say at Westminster, the atmosphere is febrile. It's a fluid situation. I want to roll out all my cliches there, and a lot will depend on what happens, I think, over the next 24 to 48 hours.
Okay, well, look, let's move on to some other stories in the world of politics. Local elections, 1 week yesterday to the locals elections. We're going to be picking over the local election results this time next week, and both parties are in full campaigning mode. We've had Rishi Sunak with his big announcements on defence spending. John, what can we expect in the final week?
Well, I look, all of the speculation that I'm hearing that's coming out of Westminster at the moment is that there may be some pushing of a button on the general election even as early as Monday. Now, I don't know whether that's true. I think Kevin would be a better sage on that than me. But look, it is... The Tories are in such a difficult position, and the question on everybody's lips, right, is that how much will they lose? How many councillors will they lose? And, I find this really, really, really fascinating, that the possibility is that the Tories will lose loads and loads of seats, loads and loads of foot soldiers who will be the people who will be the backbone of any general election campaign, and somehow or other people are talking about a general election coming maybe as early as the end of June or July. I do find that really, really odd, and that's what I'm looking to see in the next few days.
Kevin, Sir David Davis, former cabinet minister, was on with Matt Chorley earlier. He said, and I quote, he said, "I think the government would be off its head to do that," referring to an early general election. It's going to go the distance sometime in November, maybe even December, to allow some of the economic improvements to come through. So no, it would be a suicidal thing to do in political terms. Kevin, I mean, why would anybody call an election with their 20 points behind in the polls?
No, you're right. I mean, on the face of it, it would be absolutely bonkers. And I think ideally, Rishi Sunak would wait until the back end of the year, just in the hope that something comes up, that the economy turns around, that interest rates maybe come down, inflation comes down a bit more, the national insurance cuts, people start to feel it and feel that the cost of living crisis is easing. That might well help them a bit. I don't think it would save their bacon. But next Thursday is key. I mean, if the Tories have, the worst possible night, so if they lose anything between 400 and 500 seats, if they were to lose the Mayoralties in Teesside and the West Midlands, Andy Street and Ben Houchin, if they were to lose there, then I think the party could properly go into meltdown. It really would be panic stations, in which case I don't think you can rule anything out. I still think it's more likely to be towards the end of the year, but you could well see a challenge to Rishi Sunak's leadership, or he might well decide to say, you know what, I'm just going to cut my losses and go to the country now. It's interesting that they made that big defence announcement, defence spending pledge last week. The timing of it was quite curious. It led, I think, to this speculation that we could be heading for an election sooner rather than later. He won't rule out July, so I think it is under consideration. But I think ideally he would wait till towards the end of the year.
Let's look at Labour as well. They made some might say, rather rare move of announcing some policy this week, nationalising the railways. They say that new public body would inherit existing contracts when they expire and take on responsibility for running the services. John, what did you make of that announcement?
I do think these things really interesting. I mean, we have in Scotland nationalised the railway, and I'm not sure it makes that very much of a difference. I think one of the things that's interesting is the Scottish Government's been able, for example, to do something on fares, but only on a temporary basis. You can travel off-peak as part of a pilot in Scotland, time limited. At the moment, I don't know that anything would happen in relation to the nationalisation of the railways across the UK with fares, and I think that's the thing that people are concerned about. I don't know, does nationalisation, I'm old enough to remember when the railways were privatised, because under nationalisation they didn't run very well at all. So I don't know how much of a difference this will make.
Kevin, is it a policy? Someone somewhere at Labour would have done some sort of polling on this, or the focus groups that they do. They must think it plays well. Otherwise, why would you announce it a week before a local election?
No, you're right. I mean, I think the polling suggests that people do support the renationalisation. I think John's right, though. I think it's maybe because they don't remember what British Rail was like. They know.
You're not going to both start talking about sandwiches now, are you?
God, sandwiches. Well, they know that the trains don't run very well under privatisation. That's for sure. So they think, well, you might as well try nationalisation again, because the current setup isn't great. It's also, it's a bit of red meat for the left of the Labour Party, who at the moment are feeling pretty unloved with Keir Starmer as leader. So I can understand, for internal party management purposes, it's not a bad idea. And also, you're right, what you said right at the beginning, there's been precious little in the way of, big ticket policy announcements by the Labour Party thus far. I think we'll see a few more, obviously, in the run-up to the election. So it doesn't do them any harm to actually have people talking about policy for a change, and it does mark them out from the Conservatives. So, yeah, we'll see. But, yeah, I think the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, if and when it actually happens, whether the rail services actually improve.
And just before we go from both of you, do you think Rishi Sunak is well insulated for a potential catastrophe in next week's local elections? Is he going to face a whole load of letters going in, or do you think because there is a lack of an obvious candidate, John, that he's pretty safe no matter how bad the results will be? I'm sure we're going to have Conservative ministers saying, well, look, every government gets a kicking, the local elections, nothing to see here, move on. There's a big general election coming up later, which is the one that really counts. John.
It's a very difficult question. I wouldn't rule anything out. I have to say, I think it would be absolutely bonkers to change your leader this close to a general election. And I suppose I would ask the question, who would want it?
Kevin, any ideas? Who would? I don't know. Liz Truss, I think, is warming up for having a second crack at it.
Well, I mean, she's certainly mad enough to want to do it, I suppose. But no, I think there's a lot of people who will want it after the general election, try and pick up the pieces of the debris that's left after a general election defeat. I think John's right. I think to go through another leadership election with your fourth prime minister since the last election, I think would just be absolutely insane. But there is definitely, a mood abroad that maybe Rishi Sunak's a bit of a loser and that we're going to head for catastrophe with this guy in charge. I still think that's a minority view. I think, there'll be a few rumblings after the local election next week, but I'll be very surprised if enough letters went in to trigger a vote of no confidence.
Okay, well, I guess this time next week we'll be finding out. Kevin Schofield from HuffPost and John Boothman from The Times, thank you so much for your time. Now, it is 1:20. You're listening to Alexis Conran here on Times Radio.